A couple of weekends ago, I got to shoot one of the coolest places I've been, Sedona, Arizona. Talk about a magical location. One of my shots was this really awesome sunrise over the valley of Sedona, and I wanted to take you through and show you a full edit of how I went from the really kind of dark, underexposed raw file to the finished work and the settings and color corrections and masks and everything I did to go from beginning to end. So let's dive into this photo and have a little bit of fun. Let's go through this and just talk through the steps of what I would do to go from this to this. Okay, so step one on this raw photo is I'm just going to click the auto button, and I like to do that first so I can just see what Lightroom would do with this. So from here, you'll see that I have this set up on my menu here so that only one section is open at a time. So I want to click down on light. I just have the light section. When I click down on color, I just have the color section. When I click down on effects, I only have the effects section. And that way I don't get lost. To set that up, click over here in these three dots in Lightroom. You're going to have single panel mode. So just click that on if you would like that. And also click on color calibration if you don't have that already, because we're going to be going in color calibration also. So once I have auto mode selected, I'm going to go down to color, and let's adjust our white balance first. Here we have as shot, and I don't know exactly what I want it to be. So if I just go down to auto and just see what Lightroom thinks, here we can see it was shot at 6,500 white balance, 6,500 Kelvin. And if I go to auto, it wants to put it at 6,750. Daylight, it really cools it off down to 5,500. And then cloudy is going to warm it up a little bit, back up to about 6,500. And that's probably about where I want to be. What was auto? 6,750. Yeah. So I'm just going to click auto on that and just say that our white balance is good. And we can always go back and make other adjustments if we need to do that. Next thing I want to do, actually, before I do anything, I want to come down to, I think it's in effects. Maybe it's in detail. Maybe it's in optics. Here we go. I'm going to enable lens corrections, and that's just going to flatten out our image a little bit. And you know what? This is a personal preference thing. What do you think? Like, if we enable lens corrections, it flattens out that image and just gets rid of some of that vignetting along the corners and edges. I don't know. I kind of don't mind it. I kind of like the look of it without lens corrections enabled. I am going to remove aberrations. I don't think that's a problem in this photo, but I'm going to click that anyway. Okay, so now we're going to go back up into color. The first thing I like to do when I'm in color is come down to color calibration. Again, if you don't have that, come to these little three dots and enable color calibration. And then I'm just going to start playing with the saturation of the reds, greens, and blues here, just to see what colors are in this photograph. So if I pull up the saturation on the reds versus pull it down, you can see what that does. So we're going to pull up that saturation. And even if it starts to look a little unnatural here, we're going to pull that down in the next step. But this gives us a good idea of the colors that are in the photo for us to work with. Greens, same. I'm going to pull up those greens a bit. And then the blues, I'm going to pull up the blues a little bit too. And you can just see how that starts to add some vibrance to our photograph, which kind of shows us where the light is. And you can see in that finished photograph that I did, I really highlighted these areas of light that you can see how it's just hitting the tree here and coming up through here, hitting this little bush here. So that's stuff that we're going to highlight in just a little bit here. So once we have our color calibration done, I like to come up to our color mixer here. What I like to do is pull out the saturation on every one of these. And it's a little tedious, but it really helps me control color. There's some photos where I don't even have to use any masking or anything because this process is so good at showing us what color is in the photograph and what colors we can choose to highlight. So once we pull everything out, you can see that we're just left with a black and white photograph. And then I'm going to start bringing that color back in one by one. So if we just take our reds and start to pull the reds back in, you can see that there's very, very little red in this photo. So maybe back on that trail a little bit, but for now, I might just leave that red saturation completely down. Oranges is going to be quite a bit. So if we pull up that orange, that's where the trail and the tree really starts to come to life. And we don't want to pull it up too much because that is going to get oversaturated. We pull it down just, somewhere around there, -10, -11 might be a good place to start. Yellows is going to have a similar effect. You just kind of see this photo come back to life here when we bring those yellows back in. And probably about there. Greens, we're going to have, you can see it's not quite as prominent, a little more subtle. I think we'll just go somewhere around there, -20 or so. And this color, which is aqua color, there's no aqua in that image. We're going to leave that down. Our blues, we're going to pull the blues up. And really it makes the difference. When you look into the distance and the mountains are blue, and so that's really what we have here. Even not a lot in the sky actually, which is interesting. So if we pull our saturation all the way up, it doesn't look so good. If we come down, it starts to look a little hazy out there, which is kind of a cool look. So I'm going to keep that blue down, somewhere around -18, -20. And then let's see if there's any purples. Very similar. Again, you can see in the back in those rocks and those mountains, there is a little bit of purple from the sunlight. So I don't know, probably right around here. Just, there's no science to it. Let's just see what looks good to your eye. And obviously all of our eyes are a little bit different. I tend to not see colors great. So my color calibration, my color mixing might be very different than yours. And that is totally, totally okay. And the pinks, this area is known for their pink rocks and their red rocks. So I might keep that saturation up just a little bit more. So now we have our color mixer process finished. Next thing what I might do is I'm starting to notice that there's more detail in the sky that hasn't come back yet. And so I'm going to go into our masking and I'm going to select the sky. See that it did a pretty nice job of that. And we're not going to make a major change here because if we change it too much, we're going to see some haloing around this tree, and that's not something I really feel like dealing with a whole heck of a lot. So I'm going to come down to the light section here. I'm just going to pull the highlights down, and that's going to start to bring back some of that detail and start to get some of that sunrise color back in. I might pull the exposure down of that sky just a little bit, or somewhere around there maybe. We can look at our contrast. Sometimes pulling up the contrast can be a nice thing to do. I think it looks pretty good. See if there's any blacks we want to pull down. And again, this is all stuff that we can go back and adjust as we feel like we need to in the future. So we'll go back to our global edits here. One of the things that you might want to look at are your color profiles. You can do this right in the beginning when you start, but Adobe standard is just kind of the standard default. Sometimes it's nice to go to Adobe Landscape. Look at that. Geez, look what that does. Look what that does versus standard versus Adobe Landscape. So I'm gonna go ahead and select that. So we're going to use the Adobe Landscape color profile, and that already is bringing our photograph pretty close. This is the one I had edited earlier, and this is the one that we're at now. So to get to that final product, what I did from here is go back into masking, and this is where it gets, kind of artistic, and you can decide what you think looks good. Not everybody is going to think that what I'm doing looks good. Some people might prefer their own way, or to leave it here, or whatever, and that's super cool. But if you do want to take it to another level, come down to the brush, and this is where you're kind of like a painter. I had another video on painting in light, kind of like being the Bob Ross of photography. But it can be a really cool thing to go in here and just paint some of this light in, and watch how this is going to work. So we selected our brush mask. So with our brush mask, we're just going to go through and just do a little bit of painting on these areas that are highlighted. We're going to paint some light here into the trees, here into the tree branches. This does not have to be perfect, and what I'm doing here is going to be different than what I did before because I don't remember exactly how I did this, but we're just going to go in and paint a mask over the parts of this tree that are already naturally lit up by this sunrise. That's probably about right. I want to really highlight this tree trunk. This is Sedona, where these juniper trees just kind of grow with this natural twist. Whatever you believe about Sedona, some people believe that that's an energy vortex thing, and all the swirling energy on these trees just cause them to kind of warp and twist and follow that energy of the earth. I don't know, I'm a little undecided on what I think about that, but why not, right? Why not? It is a magical place, and you can just kind of feel it when you're there. So who's to say? Who is to say? Okay, so that's good. And then I'm just going to continue down here. I'm going to paint over some of these highlights here. And then we can see where the sunlight is just kind of coming in naturally on this canyon hill. So I'm just going to paint some of that in here like so. We have just a little bit coming up over this bush, like just a little bit of a halo of light coming up over there. I like that. And then just a little bit here, a little bit on these little cactuses here. And that might be a pretty good start for us. So now what we could do is come down here and just like increase or decrease the exposure, and you can just kind of see where we've painted, and you can see the difference that makes. I'm only going to bring that exposure up just a fraction right now. But the trick that I like to do is to go back into that mask, click on our three dots right here, click on that and do duplicate and invert mask. So now that's going to select everything that we did not paint. And then I want to pull down the exposure, just bring the exposure down just a little bit on everything else. So then our highlighted painting light stands out just a little bit more. Something like that, I think, looks pretty cool. So then if we go back into our global edits, we've now worked on light, we've worked on color. And if we come down here to effects, this is where we have our clarity, dehaze, vignetting, and texture. And again, this is all to your liking to see what you like. But I like to bring down the clarity on these. And it's kind of, again, I give it that just a softer, glowy type look. You can bring it down all the way. You can see what it does. You can bring it up all the way. You can see what it does. I tend to bring it down to about -20 or so, somewhere around there. I think it looks pretty good. And then dehaze is going to add, if you add negative dehaze, it's going to brighten up the image, make it a little softer and kind of add a little bit of hazy look to it. So if you bring it all the way down, you can see what it does. Versus adding dehaze gives it a more contrasty, saturated type of look. You'll see a lot of that. People love adding dehaze. I'll keep my judgment reserved, but I'm going to pull down that dehaze a little bit, probably around to the -10, somewhere around there. And usually when I bring down clarity to -20 or so, I'm going to pull the texture up to about 10, kind of make it half of what I did on the clarity. And vignetting, sometimes it can be really powerful. I don't know if I would do it on this image. Yeah, I think maybe just a little bit looks pretty nice. And then coming down to detail, I'm really not going to touch that. I'm not going to do any noise reduction or any sharpening. Optics we've already looked at with lens correction and chromatic aberration. So now if I come back up into light, we can just do some fine-tune adjustments. I might add some whites just to brighten up this thing. We can look at our histogram too and see if we have that kind of like that nice little mountain type look to it. See, we have maybe a little bit too many blacks here, which you can see is here. It's highlighted. I'm not going to worry too much about that actually, because that really doesn't bother me. I could pull the blacks up to get rid of that, and as we do that, you can see what that does to the histogram. When the blacks are pulled down, you can see that spike on the left start to go up. Pull those blacks up until that histogram kind of evens out a little bit. So that might look good right about there. One of the last things we can do is come down back into our color profile and find our color wheels, color grading. We have our midtones, our shadows, and our highlights. Highlights are the colors on the right side of our histogram here. Shadows are on the left side, midtones, not surprisingly, are right in the middle. So we can adjust our levers here, pull our midtones down or pull our midtones up, and you can again watch the histogram. We already have a really nice shape to our histogram that I like here. You can see that on the shadows, we have a lot of blue in our shadows. If we wanted to even that out a little bit, we can take our shadows, select the blue, and then increase our shadows, which is going to kind of pull that blue back up. But I don't love the look. I don't love the look of it. I kind of like it how it was. So I'm going to pull those back down again. Probably will just reset that to how it was. And highlights is the same. Do I want to pull my highlights up a little bit? Do I want to pull them down? I'm going to pull up the highlights just a little bit. I might bring the highlights back down on this side just a little bit too. So that leaves us so far with something right about here. We could go back into our masking and just make this, when we selected everything but our highlights here, I kind of feel like we might want to, just depends on how dramatic you want to be, but if we pull that down even just a little bit more, it might give us a really cool effect. Now another thing that I did in this photo is I added a radial gradient mask. As you can see that the sun was coming up right here, and I added this radial gradient just to kind of like make it, just kind of send those sun rays like through the canyon. And that's, you know, something completely optional for you. This is just kind of where your own creativity can come into play here. But if we wanted to do that, we would just go select a radial gradient and then draw that gradient through this canyon as the sunlight would flow here from that sun source through this canyon and then right up into where our light is coming in here. So if we did that and pulled up that exposure just a tiny little bit, and come down to color and add a little bit of warmth to that, then we have a look like that where we kind of have that sunlight coming in and just filling that canyon a little bit, which that can be a pretty cool look. So really, I think we'd end up somewhere like here. So on my second edit, I think I added a little bit, you know, I took more clarity out on this one. I took some more clarity out on this one. You can see there was a little rotation change in the crop, but beyond that, that's kind of where we ended up. See, this one is a higher clarity. So if we wanted to work on that, we'd come back down into effects and we could just reduce the clarity even more, bring the dehaze down a little more, reduce the clarity a little more, bring our exposure, the entire thing down a little bit more. Maybe we'd end up somewhere like there. Looks great to me, and it's just fine tuning from here with each of these little controls just to see what you think fits and see what you think works. But pretty cool, right? To go from that beginning image, the before, to the after. Pretty significant changes, and all in Lightroom. And this is all information that was captured on the raw file anyway. So pretty cool example to go in there and add this really cool dreamy look to this magical sunrise morning.